Thanks everybody for coming. We've got Connie Carlson today talking to us about the UMN Extension Regional Sustainable Development Partnership, and we're excited to have her. I'll have to right away to Mitch for any announcements.
Yeah, I don't really have any, but I know that some of the team did some cool stuff this week related to RFSI, which maybe they can tell you about. The main event and some of the side events were pretty cool. So anybody want to share?
It's just yeah, Catherine and I and Ann Kirby were at the Regenerative Food Systems Investment Forum, which was held in Minneapolis this year. It's been in Denver the last 2 or 3 years. So we were represented there well with a lot of our peers and mainly thinking about how to bridge into this blended capital space to support the many startups and other businesses that are trying to procure capital of various sorts to grow their businesses around continuous living cover. And there was an awesome event. It was a Praying Spirits launch, and maybe someone other than me share about that.
Yeah, so Beth Robertson Martin, who of 40th Century Grain and Merchant Pact, and now Perennial Spirits, they had their launch party for the first ever Friends of Vodka. And the party was at Gray's Hall. And it was really, really classy, new high of luxury, and great goodie bags too. And they had like these like leather bands and yes, perennially optimistic. And yeah, Perennial Spirits is it's Beth, and then a handful of sustainability folks as well are involved with it, and it's a really great launch. They have some great branding messaging, that their marketing is really bad and super exciting. One of the little restaurants there, Aha, had Kernza in their bread, their fried chicken. So that's great cocktails.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to acquire Kernza.
It's coming soon. Check out their website. I think it's perennialspirits.com. It's cool, but it's not available yet. But it was the launch one, so soon, I imagine. Yeah.
The last thing I'll say about RFSI is we presented there, kind of introducing or strengthening this idea around the role of crops. The transition to regenerative agriculture. I was on a panel with someone that was talking about AI embedded all throughout the supply chain, and I was like, "How about crops?" You know, and there was really good engagement, and I think that connection hadn't been made with that community very well yet.
Awesome.
Great. Any other announcements? Great. Let's get started.
Very
Excellent.
Well, it is a thrill to be back here again, to share with you the work I've been doing recently, and more importantly, to tell the story, as we often say, of the regional sustainable development partnerships, and really how we fit in this constellation of sustainability that you all are working on, and how we are a partner out on that landscape for you as you do your work. So I see a lot of familiar faces here. Whoops. Just gotta get used to how I move things. And welcome to everyone online. Hello, Jerry. I'm gonna be talking about hazelnuts. I think everybody here knows me, but if not, a reminder, Connie Carlson. I currently serve as a statewide, assistant statewide director for the partnerships. But I have been with the university for 10 years. I came into RSDP on a temporary no-post position where we had 3 grants and we had to sort of get a closer in and figure out how to finish them up, and that was me. And one of those grants, it was a hybrid hazelnuts, wool and edible dried beans. And then hazelnut work was with early work with Forever Green. So I'm part of this work for a very long time. While I was on that no post position, I wrote another book that kept me going for another 3 years. And there are a number of folks in this room who wrote me into grants and kept me busy with supply chain work. So gratitude, because one of the reasons I'm standing here is because of you, Kevin, and others who saw a need for the market development and supply chain, and took a risk with me, and hopefully in many ways it paid off. Around about 5 years ago, Forever Green got funding to build out that commercialization work. Many of you know that story. Colin and I worked for a long time on marketing and commercialization. And then in 2022, I moved over to the assistant statewide director position within RSDP. But throughout that entire time, this was the work I was doing, is I was conveying your work through extension to communities, so that your work was coming out and getting applied and shared with the communities who really want to value, benefit, and understand what we're working on. And at the same time, carrying their feedback, input, interest, opportunities to you, so that there was a feedback loop. And that's really a lot of what RSDP at the core is about. So today, again, I want to talk to you about this constellation of sustainability, of where RSDP sits in, and NISA, and CINRAM, and Forever Green, that we're all part of this family, and kind of explaining who your sibling is in this work. I'm going to share with you this community university partnership, what it looks like, how RSDP has really structured ourselves to create this opportunity for community members, farmers, business owners, educators to sit at the same table with researchers and to really build and drive sustainability forward. I'm going to talk about who we are, so some of the faces of people doing this work, some highlights of projects. I do have an ask, so there's 2 asks actually at the end of this, and then of course any time for dialogue as we have it. I'm trying to keep this at about 30 minutes. So we have plenty of time for that. Oh, and one last thing, I will introduce him later, but my colleague, Chris Britton, is right here. He's part of RSDP, joined us about a year ago, food systems coordinator, does statewide work. So he'll be a face that you'll recognize in this presentation. So I would like to actually start with a very eloquent person sharing the background of why we sit together, who we are, what we're doing together. I don't think anyone can tell the story better than Dawn, and probably more succinctly than me. So I thought I would share this video. It was created because RSDP nominated Don for Outstanding Faculty Award, which he was awarded. And in this video, he talks about the constellation of entities. So it really sort of pulls that thread of CINRAM and Greenlands and RSVP and Forever Green, and really kind of ties that all together. So I sometimes look at this video just to hear Don's laugh every once in a while, and just to be reminded of the work. So
I grew up or Northwest Ohio, family, interacting with the Ohio State University, Ohio's land grant university. So I grew up in that land grant culture. So I've been at the University of Minnesota for 45 years, and was in fact brought to the state of Minnesota. First off, working with the grassy producers in northern Minnesota to expand their capacity to industry. As we developed the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, built this working relationship with family farms across the state of Minnesota to help them deal with their economic and environmental issues. We then expanded that to agroforestry, and through that development, we created CINRAM, Center for Integrated Natural Resource Management, working on the relationships between highly disturbed agricultural lands and the natural undisturbed landscapes of Minnesota. We then decided that the only way to create that change was to basically create a new set of crops that would provide the opportunities for farmers to make landscape changes. That idea that gave rise to Greenland's Blue Waters, which was taking this general idea and networking it across the upper Mississippi basin. And then we intensified this work here in Minnesota through the creation of the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships, basically designed to help communities interact more directly with the University of Minnesota to meet their needs in partnership with these various communities. We decided to take on a challenge. We call it the Grand Challenge, the development of the next generation of crops that would produce economic opportunity, but at the same time provide landscape cover that would produce ecosystem services. But it has to be a partnership with the university, with the citizens, as well as the business sector. So that's what's unique about the Forever Green Initiative. It is, in fact, a partnership within the university from basic genomics, breeding, agronomics, food science connected to industrial. The programs that we're talking about really are designed to help farmers and communities capture new opportunities to make this landscape change.
All right, so you heard then Don explaining kind of the whole constellation. I'll use that term quite a bit in this talk, I think. And that RSDP is really part of this whole movement of sustainability that happened. And in fact, if you look at the MISA minutes from, I believe, sometime in the mid-90s, early to mid-90s, 93, 94-ish, they had a meeting at St. John's University, and in those minutes it said Dr. Don Wise is bringing forward this idea of the regional partnerships. And so there is this real linkage there. And in the time between 93 and 97, when we were formed, this coalition of farmers, legislators, and visionary faculty and others came together to form the partnerships. And so what you see here is our green book. This is really our guiding document that we still use. And in our executive summary, really drill down in what we are doing, that we're connecting community around this land grant, or being a land grant university, and being this connection between community and the university. So in that green book, and what guides us today are 3 bedrock principles. Again, community-university partnerships, so being that bridge between the two entities. RSDP does not consider ourselves the university in these partnerships. We consider ourselves that middle bridge between community and university and making those connections. We drive community leadership, so really engaging leaders across rural Minnesota to identify their needs and to bring them forward and work in partnership with the university to address them. And of course, sustainability. So when we were formed in 97, sustainability was a movement. This was, it was sort of new, and there wasn't a place for this work at the university. And so that's why MISA exists, and that's why RSDP exists, is because a coalition came together and said, we need a place for this work to happen. So RSDP works on 4 focus areas: sustainable agriculture and food systems, resilient communities, natural resources, and clean energy. And our clean energy team is actually 2 floors down from here, CERTS, Clean Energy Resource Team. And they're a unique partnership that we have with them. They're actually partnered with a couple other entities across the state, but they lead our clean energy work. We work in 5 regions, so we do not cover the 11 county metro, but we have Northeast, Northwest, Central, Southeast, and Southwest. And each of those regions has an executive director who lives and works in that region. They're part of Extension, they're considered a full-time Extension employee. And each of those regions has a board and working groups. So those boards are composed of 2/3 community, 1/3 university faculty. Each of those regions has these four focus areas, these work groups, where each of those work groups addresses those focus areas. And they are also composed of community and university sitting at the table. And the boards and work groups help us identify, review, vet, and even determine which project proposals we support every year. So you can hear in our structure that we have created this place for community and university to sit at the table together and work together on sustainability. And I can't emphasize enough how the boards and work groups, they really are the heart of our partnership. So I love showing this photo because it really shows us in action. Might be a little hard to see, but this one is our Southeast board sitting with our community partner. This community partner was a Latino business that started using some funds that RSD provided, and learning from the community about their needs, about the project and how it is impacting their community. And this, a little hard to see, sorry, but that's our boards in action: dialogue, listening, connection, communication. I want to give you a snapshot of some of the community leadership that is part of our board, so you can get a breadth of who they are and some background. Each of those regional boards sends forth an executive, someone to represent us on our executive committee. And so these are representatives from across the state. We have Roomby in the Northeast, who is the president of a nonprofit, Land Access Alliance. We've got Lyndon, who is a sugar beet farmer in the Northwest. We have Lauren, who's part of Rochester Sustainability. She works for the city. Chris Danner, who is at Land O'Lakes, and Bob Bachman, who has natural resource nonprofit background. And Vicky's actually has a long background in art. So we bring together a whole coalition of diverse experiences on these boards. And the last thing I want to explain around sort of our overall structure is that we do report to a council of deans. And so every year, that executive committee I just showed you sits down with this council, and they share what's happening in their communities, highlight projects. They often talk about how can their relationship both benefit the rural communities, but also the university. What can these community members say, do, and advocate for in their communities around the university? So again, I think you're hearing and seeing all these places that early coalition created so that RCP has this structure that authentically walks us together, community and university. Okay, so the next few slides are going to show you a bunch of people. And these are really the people who are doing the work in the region. I'm not going to quiz you on who they are or any of those names, but what I want you to leave with is an understanding of full capacity that we have in greater Minnesota with staff, expertise, connections, and this open door to community. And think of these folks as, of course, they are your colleagues, but they're your partners in your work as you're scaling up and sharing your research. So across the, these are our executive directors. These are the ones who actually, these are the folks who lead the work in each of the regions. They manage the project portfolio. They've made connections across the communities, but also are reaching into the university. So some of you may have gotten calls from David Abaz or Ann saying, I have a community that is looking to work on halal. Do you know of someone who's researching halal? And a whole range of topics like that, because then those EDs make that connection between you and that community project to work together. Excuse me. We have additional capacity with 5 new hires in the last year and a half. These folks have been with us a little over a year and a half now. But these, our outreach specialists provide us that additional capacity for that project management and resource management and connections in the regions. And again, these folks are living and working in the regions. They're sending their kids to school, and they know and work with the communities. Statewide staff, we also have a statewide staff, so of course that's me. We are led by Kathy Drager, who actually just celebrated her 20th year as the executive director of statewide director of of RSDP, and you can imagine she has seen a tremendous amount of changes and opportunity come through. Again, I serve as Assistant Statewide Director. Diane is our admin, and Mary Hahnemann coordinates our student work. So we work with up to somewhere around 50 undergrad students a year who are often placed in community with projects where they do research analysis, facilitation, other aspects. We have a statewide staff for state sustainable ag and food systems. That's where Chris comes in. Carol Ford actually lives in Milan and works on deep winter greenhouses for us. And Zach Page works out of the Crookston Moorhead area and does our food system work. And Chris here, office is out of St. Cloud. You want to add anything, Chris? You're just going to listen and learn? It's only been a year. And again, just briefly, we have communications and I wanted to share this because our RSVP Happenings newsletter is a really good place if you're not subscribed to really learn every month some of the projects and work we're doing and opportunities. We write about our projects and include information on them every month. So that's a good resource for you to stay connected on our work. And then lastly, these next two slides are our CERTS team. So knock on their door sometime, introduce yourself, get to know them. Joel has actually been with us 21 years now, I believe. And they're doing amazing work. And their model was actually one that we looked at early on, Colin and I, for how we were going to scale up perennial ag and the work that we were doing in early on our commercial scaling work. So they really are ahead of the curve in a lot of ways on clean energy, and they're a great team that also gives capacity support in the region. So they have coordinators in the region as well who are living, working, and connecting with communities in their area. So lots of folks. Do not need to memorize any of this. And in fact, the only person you really need to know is just me. And I can get you connected to everyone here to see some opportunities. So I've briefly spoken about RSVP and the projects we do. When we were formed, the legislature also set aside money for each of those regions to award every year to projects. So each of those regions I talked about has project funding. And those projects go through a vetting process where communities send their ideas in. They go through the work groups and boards to be vetted. The boards and work groups give feedback back to community members to build a full proposal. And then those full proposals go back through the work groups and boards to do a final review. And so again, we can hear that there's a lot of community university touches in those projects that come our way. And our boards and work groups often use their expertise and connections to really hone and define those projects. So, since 1997, we've done, anywhere between, 60 to 100 projects a year. So there's quite a few under our belt. Every year we create a project list. That QR code will take you to our 2025 project list. And these are just some of the numbers from the fiscal year. We led 130 community-led sustainability projects. We involved 46 students. We had 14,000 research downloads on the UDC. 185 cities were involved in this work and 93 university partners, and that also includes Native nations. So a lot of work is getting done. So the next couple slides, I wanted to give you a little bit deeper understanding of some of these projects and highlight two in particular that have direct connections to Forever Green in your work. So early on, you may have heard me briefly mention the hybrid hazelnut work, and that was something that I came into doing right away. The first job I had here at the university was supervising a graduate student named Amanda Sames, who was funded through RSVP to interview the just sort of the growing coalition of hazelnut industry in the upper Midwest. She interviewed growers, she interviewed Jason Fishbach from Wisconsin, to understand where people were, the mindset, and kind of understanding the adoption of hazelnuts and kind of setting the course for the future of the work. And so this was from board in 2015. And I came in 2016 and I really haven't stopped working on hazelnuts yet, to be honest. I meet with the Hazel Heart folks on a monthly call, just check in. And so through those years, I was part of the work and we were awarded a grant with Jason Fishbach in 2022, I think, where we helped build out the next steps of hazelnut industry work. And that's why you see some of these products. Now, it's a little hard to see, but the Crunch, the Midwest Munch, and that's all right. And the early hazelnut snackers were all part of RSDP, MISA endowed share funding, and a coalition of support to keep that hazelnut work going. And in fact, this whole project was supported by a great number of people. I can point to Colin and some of the work he did too with his entrepreneur work. So this whole coalition of work to get these crops from an idea to leaders. And then Kernza, of course, can't have a presentation with Connie and not talk about Kernza. And I say that with great affection because even before I started at the university, my dad was growing about 5 acres of the very, very early version of it. Even before I started at the university, I was able to kind of tour that Kernza and see what the future of agriculture was going to look like. So when I came into the university and was able to start doing this work, one of the additional other first things I did was work with a graduate student. We funded a graduate student to do early research and assessment of Kernza in southern Minnesota. Eric Muckey wrote a report kind of looking at what are the infrastructure and needs to really support Kernza production in the southeast. This was also I believe renewing they're not on here, but Rural Advantage was part of this, and Hero was part of this. And this eventually led to a project a couple of years ago that brought together a larger coalition of folks that ended up distributing Kernza pancake mix to 500 households in the Rochester area to get consumer feedback on Kernza. So from 2019 until about 2022 or 23, RSDP was actively involved in the scaling and commercialization of Kernza. And I love showing this because this is a 4-H'er at one of our meetings with the Perennial Pantry Early Flowers. She's making pancake mix. The picture I didn't include was of Dean Durgan from Extension smiling at the pancakes and enjoying it. She was at that meeting as well. And out of that research project, a paper, it hasn't been published yet, but a paper was written including all of these folks on consumer preferences for Kernza grain. So this is just an example of what it looks like for RSDP to take some of this early work, bring together coalitions of farmers, researchers, and other folks who are, aligned with the work and continuing to build it out. So those early examples were those projects, that project funding, they were all supported with RSDP project funding. The next 2 slides are a unique example of our work. So once community identifies a project or an idea that might need more support or amplification, one of the things that our statewide food systems team is bring together a group that either writes grants or creates an extra coalition of focus around an idea. And one of those is the deep winter greenhouse work. So Carol Ford is a farmer in Milan. I pointed her out earlier. And probably 15, 16 years ago, she and her husband built a deep winter greenhouse based on plans out there. And it kind of caught the attention of Kathy and others in RSDP. And we worked with her to build a new prototype, to increase the efficiency. The College of the Sustainable Building Research, College of Sustainable Building Research worked with us to build out a prototype, which we ended up getting funding for and planned and built 5 prototypes across our region that were used to research and improve those designs. And then just a couple years ago, we got more funding to build out a second version of these deep winter greenhouses. And they are now being built across the regions again. So we started with this single farm entity out in a small town in Minnesota, built them across the state and created these centers of research. And then we have expanded it to the next level. And so we just had an open house of the first one to be of this new version to be built. She's in Houston, and we have one in Thief River Falls that we'll have a ribbon cutting for next month, and then we have 3 more coming in the upcoming months. So deep winter greenhouses, they're passive solar. They capture the heat during the day and trap it into this base. And in the evening, that heat releases and creates this growing facility that reduces your dependence on fossil fuels. So Greg Schweitzer, who actually just left last week, headed up this program for a good 10 years. And then I want to share a little bit about the Empowering Small Minnesota Communities. Very briefly, this is a new endeavor that RSVP has been partnered with. We are partnered with the Center for Transportation Studies, Cura, and the Minnesota Design Center. There was a recognition that many of these small communities, the people in the communities wear a lot of hats and they don't have a lot of capacity to really capitalize on some of the big investments that have come through over the last few years. And so this program is really built to help communities build capacity and plan for their future. And we launched this program in early 2024 through a process that involved our boards to vet projects. And over the last year and a half, we have worked with about 97 communities. They've been involved since 2024. We vetted about 150 applications over those 2 rounds. We've engaged about 30 extension colleagues, and we actually got funding renewed for this. So in all, we've secured about $9 million in funding. And so many of these projects are ones where cities said, hey, we need a new sewer system, or we are having emerald ash borer issues, and we don't want to plant the trees and then dig up the street and replace the system. We wanted to have this more of a collaborative effort so that we can really plan and invest in our future. And so you can see we're all over the state and in all the corners of the state. And we're really focused here on some of that infrastructure work and really helping communities plan for their future. And I show this to you because I really want you to see where we have a presence across the state. So when you're thinking about your work or where you want to target some of your work, there may be places where we'll be able to introduce you to people or get you connected to fast track your work. And then lastly, promise, this is one of our last funds that we were just awarded recently through the Margaret Cargill Foundation. And we've been sharing a little bit of this information across Forever Green already. And I encourage you, if after listening to this, you are sensing some connections, to go to that QR code, because that'll take you to a form, because we are seeking interested researchers who may want to partner with farmers who apply for this fund. So this fund is really funding farmers, to implement climate change strategies and, you know, equipment, really, shovel-ready projects, for farmers to help them adapt or mitigate climate change. In our first round, we had about 36 projects that included bulk buy for cover cropping, biochar equipment, purchases, energy efficiency work, food waste reduction, hoop house improvements. So a whole range of projects. We have funding for this next year where we have a target goal of 50 projects. And when we toured some of these farm projects, many of the farmers said, hey, we could have really used a little stronger connection to the university. Because the first round, we really were like, here's, send in your application and let's roll this pretty quickly. And then what we learned from all of it is that some of these some of these farmers would really have liked to have had a research partner to understand, as like the biochar, really understanding how much carbon is captured there, or sort of a range of opportunities. So a little bit of a mix and match here. This is a unique project, funding opportunity. It allows us a little flexibility, but it also is intended to be very quick turnaround to get those resources out onto the landscape quickly.
Can I ask a couple questions about this one?
Sure.
Does this also go through the regional boards and working groups or? is this
It
more
has,
practice?
yes, yep. We try to incorporate that as much as we can to make sure that we have that additional layer of community interaction. Sometimes when the community does review these proposals, they will also say stuff like, oh, I know somebody in that community and they are also, doing this, or they have this fund, or, they could lend this capacity. So it's sort of, we see that sometimes enrich those proposals.
And then
Was the, I emailed Kathy about this already too, but
Good.
was the deadline strict about, because it sounded like we'd sort of like this by last week, but some of the partners I was engaging with were out of town, so.
Right.
It was,
That was a little bit to just gauge interest. When I said I was gonna be presenting after that, she said, do it anyway. So the door is always open with RSVP. So even, down the line, if you're thinking about this, give us a ring, so we can talk them through.
yeah,
and then as far as the researcher engagement, is it, like, would there be one coordinated proposal that you want researchers to partner with farmers and community members to put in their ideas to do this work together or?
It would
Yeah.
probably look more like at the back end where you would be matched. So this, this form that we're asking you to fill out is really to assess where you're doing research, what your interests are, where your community gaps might be. And to be honest, we'll probably take a close look at that, and if it doesn't align here, you'll be getting a call if we see an alignment somewhere else in our work. So it would be more of a, after the proposals have come through, we're going to see what's proposed. And see, yeah, Mitch is working on this, and that really aligns well with what this farmer is interested in. Let's see if there's a match there. So, and not as rigorous as you may see in other grants.
yeah, and does that also, maybe does that like flexibility also align with, like the funding cap and things like that? Like if you have an idea that could go out to multiple farmers, or that could like be a slightly bigger partnership, bringing in multiple different like layers of expertise, for example.
Yep.
But that, yeah, are you interested in kind of engaging with that type of work? Like I have this expertise that could benefit kind of a broader, like even multiple communities
Yeah.
or
Yes.
multiple farmers?
Yes,
Are you willing to engage with that kind of conversation to kind of figure out what might
Yes.
be possible?
yes, that's exactly what happened with cover cropping. So we had a few folks come in and say, hey, we need the seed. And so we created this bulk buy where we got all the farmers together in a bulk buy. And so And if you, Kathy may have mentioned that as well when you talked to her, is that we're really hoping to see where we might be able to create those larger coalitions. Yep, yep, to really make that money, you know, do a lot of work on landscape.
Sorry, since we paused for questions in the room, are there any questions online? I thought I saw someone unmute. You chat or unmute.
Not online, but I have
Oh,
a follow-up question. On the farmer component of this, I talked to Greg and I wanted to clarify, it's
Yeah.
pretty flexible and it was like $5,000-ish per project, is that right?
Give or take,
Yeah,
we've been given this goal of hitting about 50 projects.
right.
And when we kind of divided the money less a little bit of operations, it's somewhere around that range.
Yeah.
More than anything, the intent here is to really move that money. So there's gonna be just a real quick turn. So that's why we're doing the match and yes, it's not egregious sums of money by any means, but yes, yeah. Yep.
Okay, and that link is for researchers,
Yes,
but for those farmer-led projects for 2026, are you still taking ideas for those?
the application hasn't dropped yet.
Exactly.
So
Okay, great.
we're hoping to see that application come out in the next month.
Great.
And hope to award early in the next year. So you can hear it's quick turnaround.
So was the thought to like get ideas from researchers and then drop the applications for farmers and community members and then do the matchmaking?
Yep, yep,
Okay.
yep.
That's,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
helpful to know.
Yeah, we really, this first time around, like I said, it was get the ideas, get it out on the landscape. And like I said, when we toured, we were hearing this gap farmers who they were like, hey, you know what? I'd really like to work with the university on this. So good opportunity. So my last ask, I talked about those board and work groups across states. We are always looking for interested faculty to be part of our boards. We know that it's not always easy with timing and other research obligations, but through the years, we've had some dynamic people sit on the boards. Jim Luby, Carl Rosen, we've had college design folks, and when we see them sit in community, come to some of our meetings, see what the dialogue that comes out of that, the rich learning between the entities, it's pretty inspiring. And it's really how we've seen pretty dramatic and important things happen through the years. So this will take you to our board application. But you know, ring me up, call me up if you're ever thinking about it, you think there's someone, you know, you're working with who would be a good person to be part of this. We're always looking for faculty who want to engage with us on this.
So early on, you said something like you don't really see yourself as part of the university, but sitting in between the university groups. But you are part of Extension?
Yes, I'm sorry if it wasn't clear. When we write up these projects, one of the key things that we include is what is the university, who are the university connections in here? And so those projects, we are absolutely part of the university, you know, yes, we're part of Extension. But in those projects, we want Kevin to be the university connection, not Connie. So it's not RSD being the university, it's Kevin or Mitch or one of the researchers.
And so can you explain sort of the role that RSDP plays relative to the traditional extension part of the university?
Yeah. We operate in kind of a couple different ways. So first and foremost, we're less about taking the information and telling people, here's how you should be, less of the extending the information and more of this sort of back and forth, feedback between community. And so we're community led, so it's community identifying kind of the research that they need or interest for identify, and then matching the university to that. Whereas many times, like Yocum, we'll take, you know, the latest barley research and do a field day and shoot. I did a lot of that with Forever Green, where like, here we are with Kernza, and here's what's happening, learn from us. And then, whereas with RSVP, it's sort of, let's learn together, let's work together on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It seems like, I mean, I'm sure it's very challenging to try to find all those connections.
Absolutely.
Even as somebody who's been here forever, I'm constantly worried about things people are doing that I have no idea.
Yep.
So I appreciate the attempt to sort of let the ideas come from the community or sort of what their needs are, but then I think about, well, how would they know what the opportunities
Yes.
are unless they know more about what people at the university are doing, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep, and that you just described something that we are continually exploring. So one of the things that we do in our structure as well as and I didn't mention this because there's so much to talk about, but we host quarterly meetings. There are SCC meetings, and that brings together community research and the communities, their boards and leadership, to learn about projects, learn about research. Those college deans also send a representative. And so many times they're sharing what's happening in the college to the wider community. And then lastly, because folks like Carl and others have sat in those board meetings and have been part of that, you know, contributing, there's this back and forth that happens, you know, in those board meetings and work groups. So there's a couple different places where information from the university is also shared with community. So, yep.
So, to kind of do a thought experiment,
Yeah,
the kind of whole process that you run, that you explained early on. Thinking about how Forever Green could get engaged with that. And it's not supposed to be ideas coming from the university, right? But we have lots of partnerships, connections with farmers, with small businesses, what have you. And so could it look something like, you know, there's a hazelnut grower in central Minnesota that wants to, you know, explore value-added processing or something like that. We talk to them, we say, we would love to be a partner with you on this. Do you even know about this process? Here's how it works. And they would kind of
100%.
start it.
Yep.
Something like that.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's what that really hazelnut research work kind of looked like. Yeah. Yep. And don't, you know, we like it to be, you know, the purpose is community led, but you know, don't be afraid to say this stuff like, hey, we're seeing a real need in the university for farmer researchers to help us with this. Can we identify a coalition? You know, there's places like that we can work on. And that's like what the deep winter greenhouse work looked like too. So.
And does everything need to be seen as research? Because, you know, we've got a lot of commercialization needs, and so.
No, you know, over the last, you know, almost 30 years of work, it's been a range of things, food hubs and farm to school. And, you know, we're in this community, in this conversation, very focused on the sustainable ag work. But within our work is also resilient communities, which can be a range of things. We're working on housing, we're working on transportation, we're working on medical work, so that resiliency. And so sometimes, you know, some of that economic aspect falls in there. You know, we could match you up with people from community development and extension, you know, there's just different ways to work it. So, and then there's natural resource work too that we do. So agrovoltaics. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if some of that urban, like the urban development work could be nice coupling with some of the like supply chains work as well. Like if you're building out food hubs or you're building out like processing capacity, because that's like the urban rural divide, you know, the communities and the farms came together. Might be an interesting model.
Yeah.
Connie, can you say anything about the current state of farm economy, rural communities, the moment that we're in and how RSTP is engaged in that, how we might work with RSTP in any of those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, extension, our community development team, actually had a significant report, about just the challenges, there's really, extreme challenges happening out on the rural landscape for, a number of reasons around land tariffs and other aspects. And that economic, direct economic work there is not a place where, we address directly. Our work is really more of a sort of coalition aspect. I think projects or programs like that farmer, the Cargill piece is one of the ways that we sort of help folks with that resiliency aspect of kind of weathering through and providing the funding and expertise and opportunity for growers and communities to really capitalize and work together and have resources. There was one other thing I was going to say about that. It's been fallen out of the wayside. We really kind of see this as a whole holistic aspect, and so the farmers and the communities kind of working together on that work together, and the university, NISA and RCP and the like, we came out of that original farm crisis, and so this collaborative aspect, I think continues to be just as important as it was 30, 40 years ago, of how do we kind of tap into the resources and expertise that is available to work together on addressing some of this. It's not something that RSDP as a sole entity can do. We've got to work with just that coalition, that constellation of folks on the landscape.
Thank you.
All right. Well, you know how to reach me. Chris, did you have anything else that you wanted to share?
The only thing I could think of is some of our work does look a little different than the community up. Like some of my projects and some of Zach's projects, our statewide work is like grant funded research projects. And I think what we bring to those is either like expertise that we've kind of established over the years in certain areas, that have come up from community projects like the Deepwater Greenhouse, where that's kind of moved beyond to like that lives with RSDP now. We have some supply chain stuff, some food up stuff, some, rural grocery stores. So those kinds of ideas do come from either our staff or others at the university or extensions. That's another place maybe those suggestions could live. It's like working together, and we can provide a connection to community. Either if you have a project that like sit geographically in an RCP region, can use community connections, or is like something that we already work on, then maybe that's where like university originating ideas can live.
Yeah, do you ever, question I would have asked more confidently a year ago. In a world that federal funding exists for research, do you ever get written into, or when it will exist again, maybe helpful? Do you ever get written into like, I want to do like an extension piece or a community piece of, research project? Do you get written into those types of bigger grants too?
Absolutely. Yes, we have a very diverse portfolio. I mean, I could talk to you another hour about sort of the intricacies of how we do our work. Just, we're very nimble. And so, and one of the reasons why I'm even standing here today is because as an RSDP entity, I was written into a naked barley grant and a winter camelina grant and a SARE grant. So, as a statewide sustainable ag person. So yes, and then RSDP, because of those, because of that networked across Minnesota, folks do look at us and say, hey, you have those connections. You want to be a partner here where we can sort of be a network for us. There's a lot of disaster resilience work happening right now from the DHS and others. And there's been a lot of interest in how can communities themselves ready themselves in a resiliency manner. And so we've gotten inquiries and had conversations on the federal level about, can RSDP be a model for how we think about resiliency in small communities? So, yeah, yep.
Have you ever, okay, probably, yeah.
There's lots to talk about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
have you worked in resilience hubs at all? Have you heard of that?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I have a class going in one.
Yep.
So,
Yep, if you,
There's-
have you connected with Richard Graves from Center for Building I'm gonna get that wrong, I can't believe I'm getting it wrong because we work with him so much, but CSBR, Richard Graves.
now I've been working with MNIPL,
Hmm.
Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light.
Yes.
So they're working with Sabathani and a couple of other resilience hubs in Twin Cities. So it's only 20-minute drive, so that's where class is.
Yep,
But,
yep.
but yeah, so I've mostly worked with them, but I hadn't thought about the connection with RSDP before, but I've been learning about resilience hubs.
I'll send you some information on Richard,
Yeah.
because Richard is one of our college reps. He's worked with us for a very long time and has background on the resiliency hubs. And in fact, one of our last meetings, spent a lot of time talking about where he's at with development. So he's a fabulous collaborator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be lovely. Yeah, I've just learned about one in the Twin Cities that actually has an urban garden and
Yeah.
like not just garden, but like urban ag built into all the other parts of these hubs that are basically would be like community centers in the face of extreme events.
Yep.
Or
Yep.
need for community and centralization of supplies.
Yep.
Emergency supplies, and things like that. So that's a super interesting model.
Yeah, in rural Minnesota, one of the big challenges is that they have infrastructure, maybe an armory or buildings that aren't being used anymore. And a number of these communities are looking at them thinking, can this be a resiliency hub? Can this be a community center? That Empowering Small Minnesota Communities project I talked about has been working with a couple communities on kind of designing the future of some of those buildings. So
Yeah.
Olivia is one of them. So that resiliency hub work has been coming up regularly in our work.
Yeah, that's like the one at Sabathani is a former middle school, exactly.
Yep.
It's this huge old building.
Yep.
Actually, it's the middle school principal too, fun fact.
Buildings are well made, many of them are well
But
made.
yeah, it's this huge brick building.
Yes, they sit in
indestructible.
the community.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Yep. Yeah, redesigning the future.
Cool.
All right, thank you, Connie.
Yeah, thank you.